everyone, welcome to another Sideboard Tech video. It's been a while. I started off with Temur and I moved on to Simic and Gruul and Izzet, all the sub pieces of Temur, and now is the time to move on and include black in our Sideboard Tech video. So what is a Sideboard Tech video? Essentially, I go through all the current common sideboard options in Modern that you might, have a look at while you are building your sideboard for any particular deck that you're playing. In this case, a Sultai deck, so blue, green, and black. Now, a lot of people think that sideboard, it's only 15 cards, it's not that difficult to put together, but as a brewer, I can tell you, at least for me personally, the sideboard is probably the worst part of brewing. It's the part that actually changes even more than the deck, at least in my experience. It's just very, very hard. You're limited to only 15 cards and you need to take into account all the threats in the meta. So the sideboard is very critical, and I feel like, and the feedback I've gotten from a lot of you is that a lot of you really have a tough time building your sideboard, and it's completely understandable, even from someone who's been doing it for such a long time, that does it as part of his main content on his channel. The sideboard is definitely tricky. So today we're going to be delving into Sultai, or Bug. Now, if you want to take a look at the previous series where I was going through Temur and all of its sub-components, take a look at that. I'll put a link in the description for those different Sideboard Tech videos. But today we're looking through Sultai. Before we do, as usual, let's go through the disclaimer. This would include every possible sideboard option in Modern. Magic has 20,000 cards printed over its lifetime, at least 10,000-ish legal in Modern. Those are a lot of cards. For every card that I'm going to bring up here, you are going to think of another that I haven't brought up. That's normal. I'm only going through cards that are in Modern right now, that are common, that are mostly seen in the sideboard. So that goes on to point number 2. The focus is on cards that I mostly see in the sideboard. So there might be plenty of black cards, like Fatal Push, for example, that are ubiquitous in black, but they see mostly main board play. They might see some sideboard play, but more often than not, they're in the main board. So you will not see Fatal Push in today's video. That's just one example of a card that you wouldn't see. Just like in Temur, Lightning Bolt wasn't in my Sideboard Tech video because Lightning Bolt is almost always in the main board. It's never really in the sideboard. So the selections are also based on the color combination in question. So I'm going to be thinking in the realm of Sultai, not in, Dimir, so blue-black or black-green or whatever. I'm saying if you are playing a Sultai deck, so blue-black-green, what are the types of issues that you might come across? What are the weaknesses of Sultai? What are the strengths of Sultai? That's the context that I'm speaking in here. And of course, last but not least, I love hearing from you. As I said, I'm probably going to miss a lot of cards, so I would love to hear sideboard cards that you may use that I, overlooked. I think that's going to be useful because when I come back to this again in the future, I'll obviously make those adjustments. So let's move on here. So something about black that I haven't been able to cover just yet in Temur colors, so blue, black, red, blue, green, red, is that black has some pretty far-reaching removal. And, as usual, the first category in these Sideboard Tech videos is land hate. And look at the first card I included here, Assassin's Trophy. Let's just read it quickly. Destroy target permanent. Destroy target permanent an opponent controls. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it into the battlefield, and shuffle their library. So this is a permanent removal card. This is not a land specific removal card, right? So why did I include it here? Well, I included it here because I don't want to include it on every category of this Sideboard Tech video. So essentially, for this category and every other category moving forward in this video, Assassin's Trophy is essentially relevant as long as you're targeting something on the battlefield and not in the graveyard or in exile or whatever, or obviously in your opponent's hand. So Assassin's Trophy is relevant for all of it, and I use Assassin's Trophy for all of it. So I figured I might as well be the first card that I show in the land hate section, because it does say destroy target permanent. It doesn't say non-land permanent. So you can target any land you want, basic, non-basic, it doesn't really matter. So, that's something that's often overlooked. If you're playing a black X deck, you don't necessarily, or you almost certainly don't need to play Blood Moon because you have Assassin's Trophy, unless you're playing 2 colors. Then if you're playing black-red, then I would understand because, Blood Moon is pretty brutal. But Assassin's Trophy covers it all. It kind of makes Spreading Seas and Fulminator Mage less relevant here. Now, yes, your opponent can replace the land that you're destroying, but you're usually not playing Assassin's Trophy in a land destruction deck. Assassin's Trophy is coming in to target specific lands that you want your opponent to not be able to play. So a land I can think about is Valakut. A land I can think about is Cavern of Souls. You're playing Sultai, you're playing blue, you probably are playing Permission. So Cavern of Souls can be a problem. Or you might just want to destroy that one shock land that cuts them off of a color, at least temporarily, and that's perfectly valid. And of course, since Assassin's Trophy is kind of a catch-all for everything, you could bring it in for almost every matchup, and it'll be relevant in almost every matchup. So Assassin's Trophy, very useful now that we're entering into the black realm. And again, I want it to be the first card that I features in this sideboard tech video because it's, like I said, it's all encompassing. It could target essentially anything. So let's move on quickly to Spreading Seas. This is something you've seen in previous sideboard tech videos. It's not land removal, it's more kind of like land disruption or land obfuscation, whatever you might want to call it. So you are essentially turning off that land as long as it's not an island and making it into an island. So Valakut no longer is Valakut, just as an example, so on and so forth, and you get to draw a card. So it cantrips at the same time. It can be useful. Not something I would necessarily use in Sultai, but it does show up, and it is an option for you if Assassin's Trophy is not your thing, or you can't afford it, or whatever, or you're already playing it in your main and you want some more options in the side. Spreading Seas can be one of those options. And of course, you do have Fulminator Mage. Now, you're not playing red, but you do have black, and you most likely will have double black requirements in your Sultai deck. So getting to double black for Fulminator Mage is going to be too difficult. It's a body. It could act as a chump block, and you can chump block a creature and then sacrifice it before it dies and destroy target non-basic land. Again, very useful. Yeah, I would still probably play Assassin's Trophy over Fulminator Mage because Assassin's Trophy is kind of a catch-all. But Fulminator Mage, again, an option if you need it. It does still peek out its head here and there. So let's move on to Artifact Enchantment. So of course, you don't see it here, but Assassin's Trophy, right there, slot number 1. It's a ghost, but it's there. But your other options, you still have Natural State. I mean, you're still playing green, and green's really good at removing enchantments and artifacts. So essentially, these are cards that I've covered before apart from the last one. So I'll go through them really quickly. Natural State, it's a good card. It was a lot stronger in a modern era, circa 2-3 years ago. This is 2017, 2018, where it pretty much hit all the artifacts you needed, especially when Affinity was around. There were a lot of 0, 1, 2, 3 costs and artifacts, and Natural State was just super mana efficient at getting rid of those cards. Natural State was awesome. If you played in the blue deck with Snapcaster Mage, it was just brutal. That being said, in today's age, in today's modern, Natural State can be useful, slightly less relevant. A lot of the targets that you want for artifact removal are getting bigger again. But again, depending on the meta and what you're seeing around you, if you think Natural State is going to cover you 95-99% of the time, play Natural State. It's just the more efficient removal for artifacts and enchantments in green. It's the most efficient one. Wilt is pretty cool. It came in Ikoria. Destroys target artifact or enchantment, just like Natural State, except there's no limitation on CMC. What I like about Wilt, even though I'm contradicting myself here because I don't play Wilt, but what I like about Wilt is the cycling ability. So you could cycle it away for 2, and that's relevant. I don't know about you, but I often bring in artifact removal cards. Sometimes I drew out too many. Sometimes I miss side. I thought they were going to be relevant, but they're not. And all of a sudden I have a dead card in hand. The cycling ability is awesome because if you realize that you either drew too many Wilts or you don't need them, you can cycle it away and draw a card, and I really like that option. So I still think Wilt is pretty awesome. Still shows itself here and there in sideboards, and I think it's a pretty cool option for you. Back to Nature, destroy all enchantments. Believe it or not, kind of more relevant right now, although I wouldn't say this is an auto-includer in your sideboard. I'm seeing a lot of these degenerate enchantment decks popping up here and there. Very annoying, very annoying. If they, for some reason, become more of a mainstay, Back to Nature is essentially, it's kind of it's brutal. It just destroys all enchantments, not even targeted. That being said, you're not going to be using it that much right now. But again, if the enchantment decks become a thing more and more, then Back to Nature might be a pretty good option. Lastly, Abrupt Decay. So again, kind of like Assassin's Trophy, for every category as of this category, Abrupt Decay is essentially relevant. So when we get the creature removal, whatever other type of removal, Abrupt Decay is essentially going to be a ghost card there too, because it's also relevant, but I figured this is going to be the first category that I just show it in. I didn't show it in the land destruction section because obviously it says destroy target non-land permanent, so can't destroy lands. But it is uncounterable, which is very, very relevant and very, very good when you're playing against permission decks, or if you're playing against combo decks that might have their own permission package to kind of protect their combo. So very, very cool as a removal card. The only limitation is, just like Natural State, you can only destroy a non-land permanent that's converted mana cost 3 or less. Again, considering that this covers a lot more cards and not just artifacts and enchantments, this is not as bad. You could hit creatures, you could hit planeswalkers, you could hit essentially anything that's not a land. So Abrupt Decay can be good if you're playing a lot of control decks in your meta. Abrupt Decay becomes a lot more powerful, or control decks, or spell-based combo decks, whatever they may be. Abrupt Decay becomes very useful. So again, something you might want to keep in mind when you're building your sideboard. Let's move on to Graveyard Hate, the only section where Abrupt Decay and Assassin's Trophy have no relevance at all. So as with Teamer and all the other sideboard tech videos, this category essentially has stayed the same. So almost all of Modern's Graveyard Hate cards are either artifacts, or they can be played in multiple color combinations. So, the first 5 cards here can be played in any deck, and the next 2 can be played in many decks. So let's go through them really quickly. Tormod's Crypt, again, as the cheapest in removal here, being at 0, I like Tormod's Crypt in the sense that if you are playing a deck that also relies on its own graveyard, Tormod's Crypt becomes more relevant than Grafdigger's Cage, for example. So if you're playing Sultai and you're playing Uro in your Sultai deck, Grafdigger's Cage, although Grafdigger's Cage is one of the best Graveyard Hate cards currently in Modern, it's going to turn off your Uro. So that might be a trade-off you don't want. In which case, Tormod's Crypt might become more relevant. You're going to play it, your opponent's going to know you have it, they're going to play around it, which usually works to your benefit. And it is 0, so there's no cost to pay it, to play it. And it's an option for you if you rely on your graveyard. If you don't, skip it. There are better cards. Surgical Extraction, very good at hating on a specific card in the graveyard. Again, this could be very useful against many, many decks. If you're playing Dredge, if you're playing combo decks, even if you're playing permission decks, although it wouldn't be an include for me, it'll include against permission decks, you're going to target a specific card in the graveyard and it's gone for good, because you're going to be going through their hand, you're going to be going through their library, and you're exiling it all. So everything is taken away. You could remove a win condition and your opponent might have nothing else to do. You even bring it against mill to get rid of some more powerful mill cards that you don't want to see again. So Surgical Extraction can be very useful. And it comes also down to playstyle, and you're paying 2 life, although you're playing Sultai now, so you're probably not going to pay 2 life, but you could if you wanted to use your mana more efficiently. Grafdigger's Cage, in my opinion, one of the best Graveyard Hate cards in Modern, especially for the cost. For 1 mana, you're essentially saying that creature cards in graveyards and in libraries can't enter the battlefield. Libraries is also very relevant, and players can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries. So this hates on essentially everything. Dredge, control, combo that relies on graveyard recursion, anything in graveyard, just you name it. Uro, I was just talking about Uro with Tormod's Crypt. Turns off Uro decks, it won't come back. It's just a full shutdown. It turns off library, creatures coming from a library as well, so Collected Company as an example. All of that goes away. So Grafdigger's Cage, if you're not worried about your own graveyard, I would go Grafdigger's Cage over anything else. Relic of Progenitus, also very good. You're doing targeted. Well, you're not doing target. You're targeting a player, but the player chooses what the card they're going to remove. It's just expensive in my opinion. It's there to be able to draw a card. It really depends what you're playing. I guess if you're playing some sort of combo deck or control deck or whatever, then draw a card is nice. Generally speaking, I would just prefer Grafdigger's Cage, because once it's down, it's working. You don't have to think about it. It's just doing its job. Relic of Progenitus, you have the option to exile all cards from all graveyards and then draw a card, so that's cool. But again, keep in mind, if you rely on your graveyard, Relic of Progenitus is not a really good option. Soul Guide Lantern, again, relatively newer to the Graveyard Hate gang. It's just an evolution over previous hate cards. When it enters the battlefield, exile target card from a graveyard, which is useful. but it also means that you're not necessarily playing it turn 1 when you don't have anything else to play, whereas Grafdigger's Cage you could play turn 1 and never worry about it again. And then you could sacrifice Soul Guide Lantern, exile each opponent's graveyard. Okay, great, doesn't touch your graveyard, which is good. Or you could pay 1, sacrifice it, and draw a card. So if you draw multiple, you don't need them, you essentially pay 2 mana and draw a card. Fine. I mean, it's an option. Ashok Dreamrender, you're playing Sultai, so this is going to be very easy to cast. Very brutal. It doesn't touch your graveyard, unless, of course, you target yourself, which you wouldn't. Let's just talk about its static ability for a second. So spells and abilities your opponents control can cause their controller to search their library. That's good. I mean, it's not super relevant in Modern, but it can be brutal. I mean, actually, I say that, but then I'm thinking about fetches, so actually can be very, very relevant in Modern, but that's really not why you're bringing it in. It's kind of like an it's a bonus than anything else. What you're really bringing it in for is this -1 ability. And you can do this 5 times, your opponent mills 4 and then exiles their graveyard. Brutal. I would bring this again. Obviously, you would bring it in against Dredge. I would bring it again against combo decks. I would bring it against even control decks. Get rid of their graveyard so they can't, flash anything back. Ashok Dreamrender is just brutal. It's a nuclear option, apart from Leyline of the Void, which we'll cover next. The only downside is that it is 3 mana, so you're going to have to get to 3 first to cast it, but that's fine. Let your opponent fill up their graveyard anyway, and then once you're ready, you could play Ashok Dreamrender and start milling them and exiling their graveyard. Very, very brutal. Some opponents will just scoop right, just seeing Ashok, because they know it's over. Last but not least, now that you're playing black, Leyline of the Void is an option. Now, a lot of the decks that I play, they require graveyards. They rely on their graveyard at least a little bit. So Leyline of the Void, not really my style of card, but it's definitely an option for you in black. Ideally, you're paying nothing to cast it, but you probably won't have space for 4 of these in your sideboard. It's kind of a lot, unless you don't really need much else. You're going to probably be playing 3 of them. You don't really want to play 2 because you're really not going to find it then, when you need it. 3 is probably going to be the minimum, but hey, it's the nuclear option. So basically all cards in your opponent's graveyard are exiled instead of, so they're never going to hit the graveyard essentially. It's useful. Keep in mind though, let's read it carefully here. First of all, it's 4 mana, so if you're not playing this free, it's 4 mana to get to it. If a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. That means that when it hits the battlefield, the cards that are already in the graveyard stay there. They're not getting exiled when this comes into the battlefield. So, although this is the nuclear option, it's something you're going to essentially have to, mulligan down to if it's on your opening hand, if you really want to get the most out of it. So, realistically speaking, you have better options out there. If you want to run Leyline of the Void, go for it. Not related to this sideboard tech, but look at the cost of the foil original Leyline of the Void. Insane. Insane. It's off topic. But anyway, generally speaking, I would prefer Grafdigger's Cage or Tormod's Crypt, Surgical Extraction, Ashok, Dreamrender. Those are the graveyard hate cards I would go to, even if I'm playing a black deck. Leyline of the Void, it still sees play, but I think you have better options most of the time. So let's get on to creature hate here. Of course, the 2 ghost cards I'm not going to be showing, Assassin's Trophy and Abrupt Decay. Let's move on to everything else. Engineered Explosives, really useful to take out tokens, if you think about it, because you're, you could pay 0 to put it onto the battlefield, and then there you go, sacrifice it, destroy all tokens. Very, very useful against those type of decks, and they're popping up more and more. But you could also use it as a sweeper for, anything up to 3 CMC, because you're playing Sultai. Again, that covers most of the types of cards you want to target with Engineered Explosives. And what's good about Engineered Explosives is it doesn't target in itself, right? It says destroy all, which is useful again if you're dealing with a card that has Hexproof or Shroud or whatever. Engineered Explosives gets around that. Keep in mind, of course, it does also target your own permanents, so yeah, that's something you're gonna have to deal with. But depending on the deck that you're playing, you might not have to worry about 1 and 2 CMC permanents because you don't play too many of them. So Engineering Explosives might become a good option there. You're not playing red, so you don't have Pyroclasm or Anger of the Gods or stuff like that. Bloodchief's Thirst, it does have kicker, so let's read it really quickly. But for 1 mana, destroy target creature or planeswalker with converted mana cost 2 or less. Okay, Not really destroying too many planeswalkers that are 2 or less, but there are Ren and 6s out there, which is relevant. If the spell was kicked, instead destroy target creature or planeswalker. Listen, between you and me, you have better options for 2 mana as opposed to 4. I do see Bloodchief's Thirst being played because it is 1 mana. Fine, it's a sorcery, but it targets creatures and planeswalkers. Not relevant in most scenarios, but it's something, believe it or not, their players are playing, so I wanted to cover it. But to put it into perspective, I'd much rather just run Assassin's Trophy or Abrupt Decay, at least, even though Abrupt Decay you can't kick. I mean, 4 mana is a lot to get a Assassin's Trophy effect. Yes, your opponent doesn't get a free basic land out of it, but who cares? Who cares at that point? You're not, you're destroying a creature. It's most likely a powerful creature that you're not, you don't want to worry about anymore. Who cares if they get a plains out of it or whatever, they get a swamp out of it or a land? It doesn't really matter. But Bloodchief's Thirst is there. It's out there. It's in the wild. Another card I've been seeing a lot recently is Eliminate. So destroy target creature or planeswalker with converted mana cost 3 or less. There's no option around there, so it's essentially like an Abrupt Decay, but it's not. It's counterable. It's only targeting creatures or planeswalkers. Again, if you're playing Sultai, Eliminate becomes less relevant because you have if you want something that's going to limit yourself to the converted mana cost 3 or less, just play Abrupt Decay. Yes, you have to play black and green, fine, but you're probably going to get there really easily, and it's uncounterable, whereas Eliminate is counterable. So, it's something you have to consider. When you're not playing Sultai, if you're playing black something else, there's no access to green, story changes. But for Sultai, Eliminate is maybe a second or third option. Again, maybe if money is an issue, then Eliminate becomes a lot more relevant. Go for the Throat, believe it or not, still sees play in sideboards. Destroy target non-artifact creature, relatively relevant. There are some artifact creatures bouncing around out there, but not too many. So go for the Throat actually can be pretty good for 2 mana. You're destroying a creature, there's no restrictions on it, nothing. In my opinion, again, you still have better options to eat up your sideboard slots, but go for the Throat might be something that you want to play, so go for it. Legion's End kind of gives me the Surgical Extraction vibe. There's a lot of text here, but let's go through it to see what you're getting for 2 mana at sorcery speed. So exile target creature an opponent controls with converted mana cost 2 or less, and all other creatures that player controls with the same name as that creature. So before we read the rest of the card, already I can think of, again, if you're playing against an aggro deck, like Burn or any kind of aggro deck, Goblins, whatever it may be, this is actually pretty good. If you're playing multiple Swift Spears or Goblin Guides or whatever it may be, Legion's End would take care of it. But again, it's exiling target creature, so it's only 1. You're not sweeping the battlefield in any way. But let's continue reading. Then that player reveals their hand and exiles all cards with that name from their hand and graveyard. Okay, so this is an option. You can play it against cards like Living End for some reason, but that has nothing to do with it. Death's Shadow is what I wanted to say. Legion's End, Living End, Death's Shadow. I'm getting all confused here, but Death's Shadow is also something that you might want to remove. Very limited use case, but I'm actually seeing it pop up a lot in sideboards, so I had to cover it for the sideboard tech video for Sultai. Again, I think you have better options if you have green in your deck. Black and green in your deck, I should say. Because don't forget, Assassin's Trophy, Abrupt Decay are things. But if they aren't, then Legion's End, again, might be a card you want to take a look at. Might be more relevant in your meta, your playstyle, your playgroup, whatever it may be. Entrancing Melody is cool if you want to control your opponent's creatures over destroying them. This is a thing. We are playing Sultai. We have access to blue. We're going to have access to double blue pretty quickly. And you know what? Sometimes destroying a creature isn't as fun or as useful as taking control of it. So taking control of the Death's Shadow can be very useful. You could also kill it by taking control of it, depending on what your life total is. I put it there mostly because I like that option of Entrancing Melody when I need to. And believe it or not, some Sultai decks are still playing it. But again, it's more cute than anything else. It's better just to get rid of it. But if you're dealing with if you're worried about a lot of creatures that are indestructible, this is nice. This is a nice way to get around it. So moving on to Dead of Winter, all non-snow creatures get -X until end of turn, where X is the number of snow permanents you control. So if you're playing a Sultai deck that is snow-based, which is possible given the colors that are in Sultai, this is actually pretty cool because you're getting around indestructibility. You're getting around, black doesn't have a lot of cheap mass removal until you get to Damnation, obviously, and even then it doesn't get around indestructibility. So Dead of Winter is a nice way to get around that, -X, but you have to be playing all out snow. You're gonna have a lot of snow permanents, and you're probably going to lose your own creatures as well in the process. Again, it might be worth it if you're playing a lot of decks that go wide. But also a very good option against a lot of decks that create a lot of tokens, creature tokens. So again, it's going to be a call for you on whether you want to play this or you just want to play Engineered Explosives. What's a better option for you? And last but not least, Damnation, of course. Damnation's been around for a very, very long time. I love that artwork. Destroy all creatures that can't be regenerated. Not a lot of regeneration happening in Modern, but it's always good to have that ability. And destroy all creatures, so that's it. I mean, it's destroy all creatures. You can counter it, unlike Supreme Verdict, but he's doing his job in black. If you're not playing a lot of creatures or you're not worried about your creatures dying, Damnation is a pretty damn good option for mass removal. Alright, puns aside, aggro, burn, midrange, hate. So this is mostly life gain related. So you're playing Sultai, but again, you still have access to green, which is great because green is awesome for gaining life. Life Goes On is my favorite life gain card in the sideboard. You gain 4 life for 1 mana. If a creature died, any creature, not just yours, not just your opponent's that died this turn, you gain 8 instead. Almost always relevant. It's almost always easier to get 8 life out of this than it is to get 9 life out of Weather the Storm, which we'll be covering in a second. I really like Life Goes On. It's a lot more consistent. You can rely on it a lot more. It's cheaper. You get 8 life. That's awesome. You know, you played against Burn, 8 life might as well be 15 life. It's a lot. 8 is a lot for them, so Life Goes On pretty awesome. Shadow Spear, still kind of a mistake to be printing a card like this, but it's printed, it's there, it exists. You know, if you're playing Tarmogoyf or another big creature, or even a small creature, giving it +1/+1 and trample and lifelink is pretty hilarious. The ability here for permanents your opponent's control, lose Hexproof and Indestructibility at end of turn, probably going to be relevant in 1 out of 1,000 games, but fine, it's there, but you're not really playing it for that. You're playing it because it gives your creature +1/+1 trample and lifelink. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. For 3 mana, that's pretty insane. It's going to be very good against, aggro decks as well. I tend to lean just on Life Goes On, but Shadow Spear, I should probably be playing Shadow Spear more, and I'm not. But Shadow Spear, definitely awesome. Weather the Storm, I hate it. It shows up everywhere. For some reason, everyone really enjoys playing Weather the Storm in the sideboard. I don't see it. Maybe I'm just not good at Magic. I'm very bad at Magic, but I don't like... I mean, I've played plenty of games Weather the Storm. I don't like the restrictions it puts on you. You have to wait for the right time to gain the life. Is it now it? Do I do it now? Am I gonna get 9 life or 12 life, or am I gonna live the dream here? No, most of the time you're gonna gain 3 life, maybe 6. For 2 mana, that's horrible. Horrible. For 2 mana, I could play 2 Life Goes On and get 16 life. Okay? Inconsistently. All I have to do is have a creature die, which is probably not hard when I'm bringing in Life Goes On against decks that remove creatures often, like burn decks. So for 2 mana, I could get 16 life, or maybe 9. Nah. I prefer Life Goes On, but Weather the Storm, if for whatever reason in your deck is a lot more live, a lot more active, go for it. It's definitely an option. It's cool, but I think you have to work a lot harder for the life than you do for Life Goes On. Feed the Clan, if your creatures or most of your creatures are going to be power 4 or more, please play Feed the Clan. Almost certainly over Life Goes On. 10 life for 2 mana is pretty awesome. Yes, you could also play 2 mana against 16 life, but again, it's going to come down to how consistently you can get it. But if you're playing big creatures that might not die as often, Feed the Clan might be a lot more relevant, if you know what I mean. Whereas Life Goes On, you just need a creature to die for it to be active. So again, this is going to be more of your call. It's going to be a meta call as well if you think you're playing a lot more creature decks or not. I really love Feed the Clan. I'll play it over Life Goes On in certain types of decks. other types of decks. Life Goes On is just more consistent. I'm more comfortable with Life Goes On. Pulse of Marassa is pretty cool. You do gain 6 life. It's a consistent, it's consistent. You're always going to gain 6 life for 3 mana. But you're also returning target creature or land card from your graveyard to its owner's hand. Now, you almost certainly are going to be targeting a creature. I doubt you're going to be targeting a land, at least when you're playing a Sultai deck. So I really like that about Pulse of Marassa. I don't play it a lot or at all, but it is an option still, and I always like to cover it when I'm going through a green sideboard tech video, because I like the ability to get a creature that's died and bring it back into your hand so you could play it, next turn, or maybe even this turn. If you have 5 mana, you can play Tarmogoyf with Pulse of Marassa in the same turn. So it is nice. It's 6 mana. It could be relevant against burn decks. I think I need to put in more games with it. I just haven't put enough to tell you that, hey, maybe Pulse of Marassa is better than Life Goes On or something. But generally speaking, I tend to go more mana efficiency over less, and Life Goes On, Feed the Clan, they're a lot more mana efficient. Last but not least, Obstinate Baloth. Good against mid-range decks that are going to be targeting your hand for discard. It kind of reduces, so if you have Obstinate Baloth in a 7-card hand, your opponent Thoughtseizes you essentially have a 6-card hand, because they're definitely not going to target Obstinate Baloth unless they're not good at Magic and don't read the words on cards. So Obstinate Baloth is pretty cool there, but it's also going to gain you 4 life when it enters the battlefield, and it's a 4/4 body, which is pretty big. It's formidable. You're going to be able to block little creatures against burn decks or aggro decks, and you have to double bolt it to kill it. So it stands up. Still see some play in sideboard, so I included it in this sideboard tech video. But again, this is the more against aggro burn, mid-range category. It's a bit different than creature hate all out. Last but not least, control and combo hate. So you're playing blue and green. Who cares if you're playing black? Black doesn't do much. There's Drown in the Lock, but I don't want to include Drown in the Lock here. First of all, I see it a lot more in main boards than sideboards. I looked. Shows up more in the main board than the sideboard, so it doesn't, fit into the criteria of these sideboard tech videos. I'm also not a fan of Drown in the Lock. Maybe I'll keep that for another video. Let's go through these control and combo hit options. So you have Dispel, your good old 1-mana counter target instant spell. If you're playing a lot of combo decks in your meta, Dispel might be spell-based combo decks, I should say. Dispel is going to be very good here for 1 mana. It's very efficient. You're going to be countering their instant. That might be, the one instant they need to combo off that turn. So Dispel is just your mana efficient permission card. Ceremonious Rejection, very good against Tron decks, very good against any kind of artifact deck. It's a 1-mana counter spell essentially when you're playing against decks like that. So very powerful. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I do actually use Ceremonious Rejection in my sideboards quite often. You'll see them a lot in my sideboard, in my normal deck tech videos. Veil of Summer, I say the exact same thing. I swear this is not scripted. It's still legal in Modern, and you're playing green, so play it. Just plop 3 into your sideboard, maybe 2, but plop 3 in there. So long as black decks and blue decks are a thing, Veil of Summer is almost always going to be relevant. You're almost always going to bring it against control decks. You're almost always going to bring it against black decks that target you, that aren't like, playing Solitaire with themselves, Dredge. So Veil of the Summer is going to be the option for you. I play it in all my sideboards. It's an auto-include if I'm playing green. Just my own 2 cents. Aether Gust, a card I haven't warmed up to, even though pros play it, everyone plays it. Card I've never been able to wrap my head around sideboard options that target specific colors. But I know, I have to tell you, even though I'm fighting myself, it is a good card. It is a good card in Modern. It's a red or green permanent or spell. So, if you're playing against a Valakut deck and your opponent's about to resolve Primeval Titan through Cavern of Souls, so you can't outright counter Primeval Titan because it's protected, you can Aether Gust it, because Aether Gust is not countering Primeval Titan, it's simply returning it to the top or bottom of their library. So you get a stay of execution for a turn, and hopefully you kill your opponent next turn. That's essentially what Aether Gust is doing. Again, not a fan of it. Not a fan of it. I'd rather destroy the Cavern of Souls and counter the Primeval Titan or something, but it's an option. It's played quite often. Maybe I'm just deficient and I don't see how good it really is. Disdainful Stroke, I really enjoy. If you expect to be playing a lot of big mana decks, control decks, Tron decks, Disdainful Stroke, very, very powerful, because it's essentially a counterspell for a lot of their payoff spells. So Disable Stroke, very, very good. I do play it quite often in my sideboards when I think it's necessary. Negate, yeah, it still sees play. It's a counter target non-creature spell. It's a counter spell for non-creature spells for 2 mana. Again, if you're playing a lot of artifact decks, Tron decks, permission decks, combo decks, Negate has its uses. I think you have better options personally, especially if you're playing a Sultai deck or any deck that has access to blue, but it still sees play. Logic Knot, yeah, I mean, I'm almost salty when I see Logic Knot, especially in the main, but Logic Knot is a pretty cool option here. If your graveyard is filling up quite a bit, which it can be if you're playing a Sultai deck, Logic Knot is a pretty cool counterspell because you can delve for the X. You don't have to have 6 mana open. You could have 2 mana open and have like 6 cards in your graveyard. And if you don't need them, well, you can delve 6 and your opponent's not going to be casting any spells. Or no, it's not going to be casting the spell you're targeting at least. So, you know, Logic Knot, powerful sideboard option if your deck can support it. You know, it's the same argument that I would use for using Drown Unto Lock as a counter spell or a remover spell. But again, another discussion for another video. Last but not least, Mystical Dispute. Played a lot. I don't prefer Mystical Dispute. It's more playstyle. It's not because I don't think the card is good. The card is very good. Let's quickly read it. The spell costs 2 less to cast, so it's going to become a 1 blue instant. If it's targeting a blue spell, counter target spell unless it's controlled pays 3. So it's a mana leak for 1 mana if you're targeting a blue spell. Okay, pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. So if you're playing a lot of blue spells, if there are a lot of blue decks in Modern, which there are, think about Uro. You know, it's something you can use to counter it when they're escaping it, right? And then boom, they just wasted 5 cards in their graveyard, and Uro is going back to the graveyard. So Mystical Dispute can be very useful. It could be good in counter wars. It could be there's a lot of utility. So again, it comes down more to playstyle. I just don't like the restriction on it. Not a fan of restrictions like that. So that's my own 2 cents, but it definitely sees a lot of play in sideboards. Something you should definitely consider. And that's it for my Sultai sideboard tech video. Let me know what you think. There's going to be more coming. I think I'm going to be doing Jund next, and I'm going to be breaking off again and seeing what else I need to cover in sideboards that are modern relevant. But let me know what you thought in the comment section down below, what cards I missed. If you want me to go more in depth into other types of cards, you know, ask me questions. I'll gladly respond to you in the comment section, or I'll make a separate video. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, whatever you prefer. But of course, if you like me on everywhere, that's going to help me out a lot, help me fight all those algorithms that try and boost bigger channels and keep smaller channels like myself and many others down. So would really appreciate that. If you want to support me on Patreon and join my ever-growing Patreon community, which I think is awesome, thank you very much to my current patrons. Check out the Patreon link in the description down below. I've set up some pretty cool tiers where I essentially give back to you every year as a thank you for, you know, supporting me and the channel. So the longer you're a patron, the more rares, non-bulk rares and mythics I will send to you to your own mailbox wherever you are in the world at the end of every year. So check that out. There's more details in the tiers, and there's a little mini giveaway as well for patrons. So I think that's all pretty cool. Thanks, and have a